Awesome. So, how am I feeling? Oh, where do I even begin? I'll tell you, look, um, some of us may know some pretty well known lyrics. There's only two types of people in this world. Finish it for me, Elisabetta.
The ones that entertain, the ones that serve.
Yeah, and I think that's it's on my mind. Like those lyrics keep repeating in my head because I was thinking about that on Wednesday when I headed down to the courthouse. And I think it's one piece of the picture, and I think both can coexist, of course. And I went over there as an observer, as someone to sort of look at the way things were set up. And if you'll allow me to paint you a picture briefly, when you arrive there at the Stanley Moss Courthouse, you are immediately hit with, and this is every time I've gone, which is a handful of times, but especially this week, it is a row of media, tripods and hosts and, little tents set up and everything. And then buttressed against that are the media vans and vehicles, some of them which are idling. And so you have this weird sense of exhaust in the air. And then inside there are the fans and supporters and activists. At least they were in the beginning, before they closed off the whole street. So it's this dystopian, apocalyptic, little frenzied town that you sort of find yourself happening upon. And for me, it just brought me back to so much we've seen from now the documentaries and this question of paparazzi and tabloid culture. And I'm wondering how it has changed, if it has changed from '07, '08, and what are sort of the opportunities both for media as well as for consumers of culture. I think it would be easy to say oh, nothing's changed. I don't think so. I think it has shifted, and we've talked about that before. The landscape has shifted, but I think there are opportunities to shift it even more, and that's kind of where my head is at. Because I kind of think, this question of media frenzy, I think it's gotten in some ways even more frenzied because of how much has been revealed. And I'm wondering if we're still sort of, as consumers, tethering between these extremes of pacified, not thinking about much, not examining what's going on, not just with Britney, but with our world around us. And then the other extreme, which is frenzied and hyper vigilant and screaming out and seeking justice. And I'm wondering, where's the midpoint? Where's the way to balance that, both by media as well as by fans and supporters and activists? So that's kind of where my head is at with one element of this.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about, like you said, you were there on Wednesday, and as you start to, see photos of all the media outside and everyone outside, and everyone was so hyper-focused on Wednesday, and, the assumption is that in a couple weeks, some of that frenzy obviously won't be there. There won't be a hearing for people to go to. There won't be those images. Do you think part of this is, we are kind of going back to this hyper-focus on Britney, hyper-focus on media frenzy, which, a little bit reminded me of, the early 2000s with her and everyone kind of crowding her. Do you think we're kind of losing sight of the bigger picture in a sense?
And when you mention bigger picture, what specifically are you thinking of? Just so I know your...
kind of the thought that, as we saw and as we kind of analyzed from her life, there was so much focus on her, there was so much media attention, there was so much spotlight on her, which in some ways did negatively kind of impact her life. And that kind of frenzy that's around this is kind of similar in some senses in terms of kind of traditional media kind of being out there, paparazzi getting pictures, people outside the courthouse, that sort of thing.
I mean, I think it's more layered now, because I think the folks that are fan activist supporters, I don't know what the correct term is anymore, because I don't think it's just fans, and I think some mainstream outlets would like to keep it under a very simple sort of stereotypical stamp of fans, like, you know, the rabid fans, and that's not true. There, as we've talked about before, like these many of the folks that I've met and interacted with, both in person and online on social media, with this movement to free Britney, are engaged, are intelligent, have put in countless hours of labor. And so I think that, to me, reveals that the movement itself is not losing sight per se, but I think that there's sort of the similar kind of power plays that existed in the early 2000s still exist. Go ahead. Oh, I don't know if I interrupted you.
No.
And I think that it's a question of narrative, because those power plays have to do with, you know, who shapes the narrative and how that reaches the mainstream public, you know. And I had a really funny conversation with my mom, who's 74, and she now checks in with me regularly. She's like, "What's the news with Britney?" And she's, you know, with her little accent, it's very sweet. And she actually is talking with colleagues and family friends of hers, and to be able to, again, observe from the inside of this movement and then observe how it reaches the outside of the movement, there's still a lot that needs to take place. I don't know if that's a little too vague, but yeah, go ahead.
No, that makes sense. The other thing I also wanted to ask you was about these documentaries that have come out, and there were some concerns initially that they would in some way be kind of exploiting this movement. Where do you stand on that?
My position on this question, my response to this question is complicated, because I think it comes down to a question of visibility. And I think that so much that has happened, especially in recent weeks even, might not have happened in the way it did without the participation and influence of such outlets as the New York Times and folks who are sort of on the inside, who have now become whistleblowers, right? So we knew, if you watched last week's installment of the New York Times series, I mean, that's major. It blew things open, I think. And that, to me, was a big shift, because then something that happened from an insider who was part of the, you know, Britney security team, who chose to be a whistleblower through the collaboration with the New York Times, established media outlet. But then that made it into the courtroom because the attorney, Matthew Rosengart, cited that. That, I think, is a big shift, even though it was pushed back against by Vivian Leigh Thurine, that, like, you know, I think she mentioned, you can't mention that it's a TV show, it doesn't mean anything, but it does. I think that that's a pivotal moment. But then at the same time, I will tell you, I still think that the amount of labor and the amount of collaboration of the fans, supporters, activists is not highlighted as much in these mainstream documentaries and media coverage as is highlighted the emotional element of it. This question of they love Britney so much. How many times do we have to say we love Britney? Obviously we love Britney. But I think that's a tactic to sort of keep things oversimplified. And I think that's a media strategy, to be fair, to be perfectly honest, to keep masses or to keep mainstream readers, viewers pacified. There's so much more than love that went into this. There are so many layers to this, including judicial potential misconduct, including the entertainment industry that is so complicit in so much. I couldn't even tell you, like, I don't even know all of the web of connections myself, and I've been trying to figure them out for almost a year now. So I think it's a very understandable tactic and strategy to just find the easiest or find the most compelling piece to share widely, which is the emotions, the love, the passion. But then at the same time, it's like, what will it take to also show the intellect, to show much more frequently the hours put into analyzing court documents that fans and activists and supporters have been doing and sharing with one another in really heartening and important ways.
So one of the things that we spoke about in the past was, this movement and this activism doesn't stop at Britney.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, now obviously the focus is very much on her,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't where it ends. What do you think that kind of more forward-looking future of this movement will hold?
It already, I can tell you from the event in Los Angeles on a Wednesday, has already shown that this movement is not necessarily evolving, but it is starting to look even more, cast the net more widely. That sounds negative, but it's a positive in my book. There were speakers at the event. They ended up closing off the street in front of the courthouse, so there was a stage set up, and there was like a step and repeat and all sorts of performances and things in the middle of the street, which was lovely to witness. There were folks there speaking out and raising awareness for other conservatorships of well-known folks like Nichelle Nichols, actress from Star Trek, and other Amanda Bynes, that kind of thing. I think that as far as the movement is concerned, it is starting to, and it has been broadening the scope. And from the beginning, there have been activists participating in this movement, raising awareness of the, non-famous people and folks, which is worldwide. Thousands, countless of folks are under abusive conservatorships. So I think it's only a matter of time that that scope gets even wider, that will continue to address this particular conservatorship, because it's not over. She is not yet free. I think we can celebrate, but also be a little cautious to not, completely say, oh, everything's done, we can move on. We're not even there yet. But also keep in mind that this is much bigger. The whole thing, Elisabetta, the case, the issue of conservatorships and all the other, the industry, the familial issues, the judicial, the state of California, the business elements, like the financial stuff that is slowly being uncovered and investigated. It is so much bigger than I think many may realize, even now, a few years into this official Free Britney movement.
There's always been, this really interesting collaboration, I guess, relationship between the entertainment industry and the media, how things are portrayed in the media, how people consume media, the kind of information that people get, how we consume that information. We spoke a little bit about this in the past, but do you hope that looking at Britney as kind of a case study for this will impact how how that relationship works in the future, how the media industry and entertainment industry needs to, maybe clean up shop, so to speak, how the media has been using maybe those practices that aren't particularly ethical in order to ultimately, sell magazines or to get those kind of stories that we're so used to being able to consume on such a regular basis.
Yeah, I definitely think this will be sort of the it's not a litmus test. It's the sort of what was the word that you just used? The case study. It will set a precedent. Absolutely. Unfortunately, I think that humans are humans, and we are conditioned and habituated in ways where it's sometimes difficult to let go of these habits. And so I see it with my peers and collaborators, friends within this movement and beyond, like even someone like my mom or family members, where we're used to seeking out, what's the latest thing that happened? And we maybe, and this has to do with reality TV, I think, just because we're used to expecting everyone's private life being publicized, like no matter the cost. We expect to have access to, Britney's decisions and personal life and, the engagement and the wedding. And I think it is changing. I think there is much more awareness among the fans, activists, supporters of there's a questioning going on now, which really excites me. Although I do see the grappling, because as fans, we do want access. I mean, I remember when I was younger with some of the other performers I was interested in, I was like, give me more detail. I want the gossip, like what's the scoop? But the questioning now is, how do I do that in a way that doesn't harm anyone? How do I do that in a way that doesn't harm myself, where I'm like, this is anyone, not just me, where, realizing that kind of action, those kinds of habits are harming many, including the consumer themselves. So I do think that things are shifting. I do think it will be, and it already is starting to show itself. This case is showing itself to be a new opportunity and standard for consumers of culture, for media as well. I mean, this week, a couple of well-known media figures who were covering this have started to change, and sort of backtrack and maybe shift their coverage to admit, for example, that, the reporting that Britney voluntarily checked herself into a center in 2019 is incorrect. And I can speculate that they felt pressured to do that. I can speculate a number of reasons, but the truth is that that's happening. So that to me is it's a very positive shift that I see happening.
Let's say, later this year that this conservatorship does come to an end for Britney, for the sake of argument, which obviously we hope will happen for her, but we'll see what happens. If that is kind of the result here, or actually kind of regardless of the result,
okay,
do you think that we, as, a society, as people who consume media, as media outlets, really need to make that change to more ethical ways of consuming information about celebrities in general? Do you think that's, really an essential step, given whatever Britney's outcome is, meaning that, Britney's conservatorship does come to an end if we start kind of poking and prodding her like we did in the early 2000s? We're kind of losing the point here. We're not really helping her in any capacity. We're not really being supportive at all. And if she does it come to an end, then we're kind of continuing the cycle slightly for her.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think that, again, this is something that I sort of see as a constant grappling among fans and just passive consumers as well. It's something that needs to be actively, regularly practiced in a way that a person can check themselves and say, okay, for example, I'm at the supermarket, I see a magazine cover, and it's somebody whose TV show I love watching, their reality show, and I look at it, and there is that spark of curiosity or a spark of emotion that's tapped into, but with the headline and the photos and the whatever. But now I do see, both in myself and many folks that I've chatted with along the way, that pause, that moment of what's going on here? Do I need to throw myself and give in to that invitation that I think has harmed not just Britney Spears, not just other celebrities, but actually consumers themselves? I think something to keep in mind for, fans, consumers of culture, is that there are ways to enjoy the sort of the elements, the delights that come with entertainment, while also constantly checking ourselves and realizing, is this the same kind of habituated, conditioned approach that did and continues to do a lot of harm to everyone involved. I sincerely hope that this kind of pause and check yourself happens not just with consumers but also producers of culture. I think that there have been some changes to like what is considered profitable that may motivate producers of culture, but that remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Another big part of this movement is, things like women's rights,
Mm-hmm.
reproductive rights, disability rights, is a large portion of Britney's case, and is also a large portion for a lot of other people who are under conservatorship.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to be a big aspect of this, activism moving forward, kind of looking at some of those rights that people should have, and maybe having under these circumstances?
Yeah. My hope is that it does become even more of a sort of central theme to look at, not just with the case of Britney Spears, but with individuals, citizens, let's put it that way, making the connection between somebody like Britney Spears saying in court officially that she was not allowed to remove her IUD because of this abusive conservatorship, and, for example, things going on with abortion bans and things that affect the entire country, that may affect the person, your neighbor next door, or somebody that you care about, or somebody you don't even know. Those connections, looking at the way something we connect to through fandom or celebrity and something that's real life, I think has been at the forefront with this movement, because there has been a lot of sort of vocal expression that this is a human being. Britney Spears is a human being and she deserves the rights of any human being. And I think I hope that continues to grow, especially with the questions of, bodily autonomy, reproductive rights, and then these questions of, are conservatorships even necessary anymore? That's maybe controversial. There are some folks who believe in abolishing conservatorships. There are folks in this movement or peripheral to this movement who still believe in conservatorships to some degree. I think it's good to have sort of differences of opinion, but at the same time, the questions that come out of that are how much of someone's personal autonomy is at stake in, for example, a thing such as a conservatorship.
Mm-hmm. And also questions of, oversight over
Mm-hmm.
a conservatorship and that sort of thing also, I think, in terms of Britney, really came into play. And I think a lot of people didn't necessarily understand the lack of oversight sometimes, for example, in Britney's case.
Absolutely. And I think in that regard, it was almost 13 years, maybe over a decade of really calculated collaboration between media and the entertainment players involved in this conservatorship, and of course her family, which, let's not open that book. We'll just leave that alone for now. And it's, yeah, that's it.
I think that's all the questions that I had for you today, unless there's anything you wanted to add.
Let me see. I wrote some notes here. Hold on. Give me a second, Elisabetta.
No problem. Take your time.
I just think, I want to choose to be optimistic. This is new for me, Elisabetta. Like, I'm typically, highly skeptical, but I do think that, taking a moment to reflect has offered me a chance to see that there are major strides that have taken place, and there are major strides that are necessary moving forward, not just for individual consumers of culture, not just for the fans, activists, supporters. I think you need to hyphenate those now because it's not just one anymore. And then there are major strides ahead that I hope will be taken by media that that really question that sense of visibility and how much visibility is too much, and sort of that question of clicks and profit, and, is it important to have the story when we now know that that often caused a lot of harm and continues to cause harm, unfortunately, in the entertainment industry. And, this is not the only case in recent entertainment news where lots of things were sort of coming out of the woodwork, and we see the abusive nature of many within film and music and television. And my hope is that everyone, not just consumers, keep pushing, because look how important things are taking place, you know what I'm saying? Because of that pushing.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll definitely send you a link the second it's live. It'll probably be live sometime tomorrow.
Okay, wonderful. Have a lovely Sunday.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, take care. Bye.